The following program is presented to you by the New York State School Boards Association.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone. We are happy to have you join us for today's webinar, Building a More Diverse Workforce. This is part 3 of NYSSBA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity webinar series. I'd like to begin by thanking the Utica National Insurance Group for their sponsorship of this webinar series. Utica National has been insuring public schools in New York State for over 45 years and is proud to support our work here at NYSSBA. My name is Darcy Dercoli, Director of Leadership Development here at the New York State School Boards Association. I will be moderating today's conversation along with my colleague, Mark Schneider, NYSSBA's Leadership Development Manager. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon, Darcy. I'm happy to join you today.
Mark and I are joined today by 3 special guests. I would first like to introduce Dr. Lorna Lewis. Dr. Lewis is the superintendent at the Malvern Union Free School District. Hello, Dr. Lewis.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Also joining us today is Dr. Deborah Wortham. Dr. Wortham is the superintendent at the Roosevelt Union Free School District. Hello, Dr. Wortham.
Good morning, how are you?
Good. And our final guest is Mr. Sylvester Cleary. He is the president of the New York State Caucus of Black School Board Members and also serves on our NYSSBA Board of Directors. Welcome, Mr. Cleary.
Good afternoon, Darcy. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and thank you all for making the time to be with us today. Before we begin our conversation, I want to briefly review what has been covered earlier in this series. The journey has provided us an opportunity to shed some light on these pervasive issues and their impact on the learning environment. Along the way in our previous webinars, we've identified that this work impacts every school district and is focused on ensuring that students' race, ethnicity, disability, economic status, gender, or sexual orientation, etc., are not and should never be the predictors of their future success. We've discussed how systems and institutional structures play a key role in either fostering or combating equity in our schools. We've identified the ways in which an individual's personal biases can damage a student's ability and willingness to learn. And most importantly, we've shared strategies for board members looking to engage their districts in this work. If you missed either of these first 2 webinars, they can be found on the NYSSBA YouTube page. Under the videos tab, you'll see the titles Equity and Inclusivity, the call to action, the institutional racism, raising awareness and meeting students' needs. You'll also find our policy webinar there as well, called Bridging the Equity Divide Through Board Policy. So please go visit our YouTube site. These are great resources to share at your board table with your fellow board members. Today, we are concluding this webinar series with an examination of a topic that has challenged school districts for a number of years, building a more diverse workforce. Did you know that according to SED's 2019 Educator Diversity Report, nearly 55% of all students in New York State are students of color, but more than 80% of our teachers and administrators are white. You might agree this is a sizable disparity. Outside of the big 5 districts, New York City, Yonkers, Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse, the percentage of white teachers and administrators jumps to nearly 94%. The same report states that over 200 school districts in New York State do not employ a single teacher or administrator of color. In today's webinar, we will share why this is such a big problem, even in our more homogeneously populated school districts, and what school districts can do to address the issue. You'll see the attachments for this SED report on the sidebar of your screen today, along with a few other attachments. So now I'd like to invite Mark to get the conversation started and ask our panelists our first question.
Thank you, Darcy. So, as you've just said, we've just heard that outside the big five districts, non-white school personnel account for only 6% of the profession. And over 200 school districts in the state currently do not employ a single teacher or administrator of color. Dr. Lewis, I'll address our first question to you. Why is this a problem? Why is it critical that districts build a more diverse workforce?
Well, I would say to everyone who's listening to look at your school data and look at it in 1990. So you might say, well, I don't need to think, I'm a white district, so I don't need to think about diversity. But I would challenge you to look at your 1990 data and look at your 2020 data. And I'm absolutely positive, I could bet dollars on it, that no matter how white your district is, you think your district is today, there's diversity in your district. Whether it's diversity of color, whether it's diversity of LGBTQ, there diversity in the abilities of students. Diversity exists, and it is the trajectory that will grow. We know that it is growing. You just gave us some significant data that when you look at New York State has majority people of color in our schools as children. That is the 2020 data. But when we look at the workforce, that has been stable throughout. Our workforce is not getting any more diverse, even though our children of color are growing. And we know that children need role models. And I don't just mean Black children need to see Black role models. I mean, it is extremely important for white children to see Black people in front of them who are not just the cleaners of the building or working in the cafeteria, but that they're role models that they can see that they can aspire to become. I know as a superintendent, when I walk into a classroom, my children's eyes light up. And that's what I want to see. When they see someone of diversity who is in charge of the system, they light up. Whether it's the white students that I served in Plainview or the students I serve in Malvern. Children need role models. They also need models so that when they go out into this diverse world that we are sending them into, they know how to work and plan and collaborate with people of different points of view and different ethnicity. We're preparing them for a diverse world, and therefore we must provide them with a diverse workforce so that they can see excellence in every color.
Yeah, I love that statement, excellence in every color. It's so true. And Sylvester, can you share with us a little bit more from the board member's perspective? I know you've had a long tenure as a board member and you serve in many capacities. Tell us a little bit from your perspective why this question of building a diverse workforce is so important to our kids and to the staff and education as a whole.
Well, Darcy, that's hugely important. But what I like to do is just share with you a small personal story that brings to the heart of this and what Dr. Lewis just said. In my early years in school, from 3rd to 6th grade, I attended an all-white school. And my brother and I were the only students of color in the school. Excuse me. And there were a group of students that made my life miserable. I mean, they made fun of me, the way I talked. They made fun of me, how I walked. They made fun of me of what I ate. You know, back in those days, all the kids were bringing their lunch to school, and they had all these beautiful looking sandwiches, you know, ham and cheese and lettuce and tomatoes, and they had snacks and they had fruit and they had milk. Well, I came to school, we were very poor. I came to school with a piece of homemade bread and a piece of bacon and was happy to have it. But these students, this group of students, consistently made it difficult for me. And they would take my homework and hide my homework so that I would get incomplete. They would hide my pencils. And what they made me feel was inferior, and it worked. I felt inferior, and I felt inferior until I've gotten to the 7th grade, and I read the preamble to the Constitution. It was the first time that I read it that I understood it, and I thought to myself, somebody has been lying to me. This is not right. It's not fair. And so that started me to looking for the truth and looking for the common denominator in everything. And in the past 13 years, out of all the work that I've done on school boards, out of all the meetings that I've gone to, I have come to realize there is one thing that stands above all that would help students to be on somewhat of a level playing field. And I can give it to you in 5 words. And this is what I tell every single student I get a chance to talk to. As simple as this: there is greatness in you, period. It makes no difference if you are a D student or an A student. There's greatness in you. If you are a special ed student or a gifted student, there is greatness in you. And when we get this across to our kids, it really makes a difference. I can tell you another little small personal story. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter. A year ago, she was 3, and I happened to mention to her, I said, her name is Gianna, we call her Gigi. I said, Gianna, there's greatness in you. And one thing that we have to learn to do is we have to learn to face our fears. She never said anything. This was when she was 3. 3 weeks ago, we were sliding down a hill, and it was a huge hill on her sled. It was on this huge mound, and she was sort of reluctant. And she looked over at me and she said, Grandpa, I know there's greatness in me. She said, and I'm trying to face my fears. And when she said that, it really blew my mind, because I thought, now here is a young girl who's 4 years old and have already realized these 2 heavy concepts, that she was somebody and that she had to learn to face her fears. And if we can instill that in our kids at an early age, that would help so much in terms of a diverse workforce. The most common denominator, I mean, in terms of a diverse workforce, if we could just realize that through diversifying our workforce, we could solve many problems simultaneously.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It does do a lot just to reduce the implicit bias that we might have, never having seen another person of color growing up, such as you experienced in your district when you were a young boy. And Deborah, Dr. Wortham, would you like to expand a little bit more on about why it's important that we really address this issue? Why is it important from your perspective?
Wow, I could listen to Dr. Lewis and Sylvester Cleary all morning long. You know, we know what research shows, Darcy. We know that research shows that establishing a diverse workforce is just the key to closing the gap in student achievement and opportunity gaps, if you will. We know that let me just go to, I'm going to take a page from Sylvester's book, because when I went to college, and which was like 3 years ago, no, not true. When I was in college, there were 33,000 students, but 50 African-American students, 50. This was at the University of Wisconsin. And we were strategically placed in Lowell Hall, in all Jewish dorms, so that we could learn the culture and they could learn the culture. So to have a diverse workforce, it's not only the diverse workforce, but how do we learn and embrace that culture? So that when we stand before students, Sylvester, we're standing and we're saying, I have what it takes. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's the message that we give to our students every day. So we have to make sure that we are able to bring that background to the foreground and to allow our young people to know. So I really believe that a diverse workforce is really associated with improved academic outcomes on standardized tests, attention, retention, advanced level courses. Kids have to see in order to believe. And when they see, they believe, they experience, then they can project. Our vision statement says that we're empowered, that we're proficient, and we're globally ready. So in order to be globally ready, we've got to put our students and our staff in that position to see who we are and what we stand for. Greatness.
And Dr. Wortham, I'm glad that you brought up the research, because the research is telling when it comes to diversifying a workforce and the impact that it has on all students, not just students of color. But speaking first specifically of the students of color, recent research has shown that, if a student of color has a teacher that looks like them by third grade, and that's the only factor that is different, the likelihood of them going to college increases by 13%.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
also see in the research that there are increases in, as you said, academic achievement, but there's also increases in attendance and engagement when students of color have teachers and administrators that look like them. Disciplinary rates improve. The likelihood of high school completion improves. But then if we talk about all students, it's important that we're able to identify with these various perspectives that students get in their curriculum. And so they're not just hearing one side of the story or one side of the history. For example, we see an increased sense of civic engagement for all students of all backgrounds. We see improved critical thinking skills for all students. And of course, the elimination, as we said, of stereotypes and implicit biases, and the increase of the likelihood of acceptance. And so I think it's important to note that when we talk about diversifying a workforce or diversifying a teaching or administrative staff, the benefits are not just for the students of color, but it's for all students from all backgrounds. And Darcy, you shared a story with us a few times in our conversations about your own children and how going to college, they were for the first time ever exposed to people who were different from them. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, because even in our homogenously grouped school districts where we don't have a diverse student population, our students are going to be leaving our school districts and going off into the real world, where they will have to interact with people who are different from them. And so I believe it's really important that we inspire them to understand that stereotypes are not always what they come out to be, and teach them how to learn from and learn with other people.
Mark,
Right.
Mark, I
Absolutely.
just want to tell you that Michelle Obama's book, Becoming, she speaks of going to college, and her roommate, who had never seen anyone of color, her roommate asked to change dorms because she couldn't deal with having a roommate of color. So this is a child who probably grew up and was never exposed to someone of color. And look, she missed out on saying that she had a room with the First Lady of the United States. But I also want to add that John Hopkins research, in case people are looking, people say we always say these things, but the research comes out of John Hopkins, where they say that Black students who have had just one Black teacher by third grade were more likely to enroll in college. And that's research that in a scholarly journal. There are other places that you can find it, that it sets up trajectories that are very different when students of color are exposed, particularly male students. The significance was doubly significant when it was a male student if they've had a male teacher. And that research also says that teachers of color had higher expectations of them than a white teacher. So a Black boy having higher expectation from their teacher sets a different trajectory from a teacher who says, okay, he's had such adverse circumstances, let's give him an opportunity here. Whereas with a Black teacher, they will say, listen, life ain't been no crystal stairs. Using Lanston Hughes. Let's get on it. Let's work at it. You know, there's different expectations because they've understood the struggle. You know, a Black teacher who's in front of that student has probably been through a struggle, gone to college where they've had to take out loans. They know no parents are going to send them to college, so they've worked harder for that struggle, and therefore they expect their students to do more to get through it and get on to college.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dr. Lewis. And I've also read a little bit in the research that teachers of color may serve as advocates and cultural translators for students of color, so to speak. And in particular, Easton and Brooks, also their research has suggested that having the same race or ethnicity teacher is likely to be comforting at a subconscious level. You know, it relieves that stress for students of color or anyone who sees someone like themselves as a teacher in front of them, and like you said, supporting their academic success. I know I was just talking about something very similarly about having something modeled for me is one of my, I know it, learning styles. I have to see it sometimes to believe it. And I think it's the same kind of a thing where, you know, if I see someone like me standing in front of me, encouraging me, demonstrating for me that they're smart, they're intelligent, I'm going to believe that I too can be smart and intelligent, and I'll have more confidence in myself. So I think all of us can relate to that. And I do know that exactly what you said for boys of color, especially important that they see men, teachers of color, in front of them. So anybody out there who has a young son of color who wants to encourage or is interested in teaching, I would really, really ask you to encourage him to take up that journey and see if he would like to become a teacher. They're so, so needed. So Mark, let's jump into our second question for our panelists.
Sure. So we've gone through all the reasons for and all the positive outcomes of building more diversity in a school district's workforce. And it's clear that this is an initiative that is beneficial for all school districts. And I'm going to quote our colleague Jay Rowona, who says all the time that now is the time to do this work. Of course, it has always been the time to do this work, but the public awareness of this need has never been higher. And so, Sylvester, I'll turn to you for our next question. What can a Board of Education do to foster a district that's looking to build a more diverse workforce?
Well, Mark, there's a couple things that a board can do. I think the first thing the board should do is to ask the question, why? Why am I on the board? What is my motivation? You know, what is my intention? What do I hope to accomplish by sitting on this board? And if your answer is that you are here for the students, then you're in the right pew and you're moving in the right direction. One thing that we have to realize is that we as board members, we actually stand in the hot seat because we set policy. That's our job, to set policy. This, what's happening now, what has happened in 2020 with the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement, what has happened with the economy, recession in the economy, what has happened with the political unrest, what has happened with January the 6th and the riot in the Capitol building, all of this has led to somewhat of a head. And this is a time of change. And this is our time. It's time for board members to, first of all, realize that we are elected by our community to serve students only. And in the process of doing that, one of the first things we must realize is that we have to be able to compromise within our board. We can't have everything one way. It's about compromising for the betterment of our students. And the other thing we have to do, we have to learn to build our relationships. And we have to build our relationships on all fronts. We have to build our relationship with our superintendents, with our teachers, with our students, with our community, with our parents. That is the basis, what I call the most common denominator of how we move forward. The other thing boards can do that I don't see enough of us board members doing is this. When NYSSBA puts out an advocacy alert, all boards should be jumping on that. Why? Because when we speak as educators with one voice, we get things done. When we get parents, board members, teachers, and everybody concerned in education, when we start speaking with one voice and we talk to our legislators, that's the only way we can have effective change. And the reason why this is so important, like I said, I think one of the most important things that we can do is have diverse teachers. I have a vision. My vision is that one day there will be a person of color in every school where there are students of color. And like I said before, that will cover a multitude of problems that we're currently going through. You know, with absenteeism, I mean, you can go right down the line of the problems that we're dealing with. If we only could put some funds and some effort to get our boards to understand, first of all, that they hold the key by producing policies that is fair to all students. And with that, I mean, it'll take us forward in a lot of different ways.
Thank you, Sylvester. Deborah, did you have something you wanted to add to that? I'm sure you do.
Yes, I do, because, there's such a thing as time and place. And I think this is the right time for me to be in this place in Roosevelt, because the board actually put in place an equity policy. And when I read the policy, I just believe that I am here to serve for such a time as this, because this policy is reviewed every year and moving forward. Now, in addition to the policy, the board creates policy, but then it's up to the superintendent to implement that policy. So together with the community, we actually launched the strategic planning process. And honestly, Darcy, it was over 100 community members, staff members, teachers, students, board participating in this strategic plan, which is being released today. And I am so excited because it speaks to the commitment of equity and diversity and inclusivity for this entire district. It's built on 5 goals. It's built on 4 pillars. It's built so that the teachers have the strategies and the steps that they use. Not only that, it's built so that the organization, the central office, everyone knows their role. And so I can say there's no other reason, or maybe this is why, in the Roosevelt Union Free School District, that we can be proud of its diversity at this point of the workforce, because we have 37% of our population African American, 40% white. So we're on a roll. We're moving forward, and we know that this is everybody's business. Everybody's business, and that's why I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'd like to coin that phrase, everybody's business. This whole topic of diversity, equity, and inclusivity is everybody's business. One thing I do want to point out, both Sylvester and Deborah have talked about the importance of policy, and we published a template policy that comes out of NYSSBA, out of our policy department. There's a policy, a regulation piece, and an exhibit piece. It's very thoroughly, very well done, and I have to really congratulate my policy team on doing this. It is right on our website, right under the member services tab. Just click on policy services, and you'll see those 3 pieces up there. Anybody, any one of you can just go to that our website and go to that tab and just download it for yourself. You could do exactly what Deborah's just talked about, you know, where the board has the opportunity to make policy that really counts for all students, and it's everybody's business. And so, Deborah, your strategic plan was released today. Is it like out on your website or somewhere where people could go look at it?
I could make sure that that happens, yes.
Okay, that would be wonderful. And Dr. Lewis, you know, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this topic too. What can the board do? What do you see happening?
First of all, I did work, a number of superintendents worked with New York Education Trust to put out a diversity playbook, and I would encourage you to go to that site, but also I'm going to ask you, Darcy, to link this to the site. It's the on New York Trust, and it literally gives 5 steps that school boards should take if they're serious about diversity. And you know, this is hard work. This is hard work, and you really can't mandate hard work. So whereas you can create a policy, which we should do, but you also have to look at your beliefs. You have to look at whether you have a welcoming and an affirming environment, which is part of the cultural competency. We have to look at, if you bring people to your district, are they willing to stay because you've invited them to a place that they will be supported. So yes, there are steps. Do you have ladders of career advancements? So are you as boards building that in? Are you collecting data so that you're looking at who is interviewed, what percent of those interviewed are people of color? Because if you know, they say whatever you inspect gets done. You know, if you start measuring something, it gets done. So if the board sets an expectation that if you have a position that you're reaching out beyond your usual group of people, beyond your just the confines of your community, reaching out to sororities, fraternities, to looking at, you know, I applaud districts that go to other countries. In fact, our president, our superintendent of the year, who is in, I'm going to forget his district, sorry, but he is Roberto Padilla. He actually goes to Puerto Rico to recruit people, Latinx people. So are you looking in different places? Because if you're looking in the same places, you're going to get the same people. So look at your interview processes. One of the things we're in the process of doing here in Malvern is looking at the questions that we're asking interviews. So we're setting up and matching those questions against some standards that would identify whether or not you're eliminating people by the interview questions that you're doing. Are you working on the environment that you have for educators, so that you're not just, when you bring somebody of color in or you bring a Latino person in, you're not bringing them in to do translations. You know, so you pull them out of their classroom so that because they're the only person of Latin origin, so that they end up being your translator. Or a Black male teacher being the teacher who everybody goes to discipline the male teachers. So you have to look at some of those microaggressions that occur within your structure of your environment to make sure that that you can accomplish those things. And of course, has the board put their money where their mouth is? Have they allocated dollars towards professional development so that people can understand the importance of diversity and that they can understand some of those microaggressions? So when going back to that food that you brought in, Mr. Cleary, you know, if you have a growing Asian population, you're not saying, would you please not bring that smelly food in here? Or that, you know, those kinds of things. Those are microaggressions that teachers don't even know that they're doing. You know, so those are equity training. We have a training that's called Unraveling Racism. That's very important. And I want to applaud Henrietta Rush. That district has done some incredible work on diversity. And if you go on their website, I want to salute my colleague Lawrence Bowright, we call him, on the work that has been done in that district. It is transforming. So go onto their website and see the work that they did with their community and their teachers to create a welcoming and an affirming environment. So there's a lot of work to do. This is hard work. You can't mandate hard work. You have to support hard work.
You know, Dr. Lewis, you said something that I think is very important in the ground work of doing this work. You said, you know, what are your beliefs as a Board of Education and as a community? And the great work that Henrietta Rush did, which is reaching out to the community to really bring those stakeholders in. And that is also the first recommendation out of SED's Diversity Educator Report, is discuss educator diversity with your stakeholders, including everyone who you're going to identify as that. And the board really has to come to terms with what are our beliefs, what are our values, what are the values of our community. Let's take a look at the data. I think you or Deborah or Sylvester mentioned earlier, you know, what does your data look like? What are the trends of your data and your demographics look like? Mark and I work with districts all over the state. We know and see demographic data changes quite a lot. We know that boards of education are beginning to take this conversation up, and they do need to really talk with their stakeholders to get a sense of where is their starting point and what's the conversation that needs to happen. But certainly the values and the beliefs have to get identified. You have to look at those and really put, like you said, you know, your money where your mouth is. So what are the strategic objectives? Like Deborah said, they have a strategic plan. That is the leverage piece for really beginning to put action to step and really beginning to get the tread going on the blacktop. How are we going to move and make progress going forward? And I'm sure there'll be lots of starts and stops, but it's the initial foundation that will keep the movement going forward. So taking a look at all of these things in your policies through an equity lens as well, review other policies to address those microaggressions like Dr. Lewis just mentioned, making sure that you're creating, from a board's perspective, what can you do to help create and support a very welcoming school culture and climate for your teachers and for your students. Extremely important to maintain that culture that will welcome and embrace diversity for all the good reasons that we have already described. And Mark, I'm not sure, or anyone else, you might have more to say on this topic about what can our boards really do to continue to encourage diversity in the workforce.
Well, Darcy, I will add that, and you know, Dr. Lewis, that this wasn't planned, of course, but there is an article coming in our onboard newspaper about the Rush Henrietta Equity Journey Program, and so we've got a little symbiotic relationship there. That's fantastic, and it wasn't even planned. And Darcy, you mentioned you know, talking with your stakeholders, and I think most important in those conversations is for the board to listen. You know, don't just have the conversation to have the conversation. The board has to be able to listen to their stakeholders, and that includes the most important stakeholder, the students, to find out their perspectives, to take a climate survey or to find other ways to get their input on what's happening in the school building and in the school district. So I want to make sure that we're not only talking to our stakeholders, but we're listening to them as well and really internalizing what it is that they have to say. The students and parents are the experts on what works best for them and what their needs are. And so I think it's important to take those into consideration when developing this vision and these policies and this new movement forward.
Right.
But
Well, Mark, um, if I may, let me bring this conversation into the now. As I looked at Dr. Wortham and Dr. Lewis, who I admire both of you ladies so much. I've been following you for a long time. And I feel good just being on this panel with you. It makes my heart warm that I'm on this panel with you. And the thing that I like about you ladies, here's what I like about you ladies. Not only are you dedicated, not only is New York State better off by having you as educators, but what both of you ladies do that I love is that you show your passion on your sleeve. You show your passion. And that's what we're missing. That's one of the things we're missing in education today. We are missing the passion, because that passion, it trickles right down to every student. It goes throughout the entire district. I think I was talking with Darcy and Mark the other day, and I was explaining to them that, we spend tens of billions of dollars every year in New York State on education. And there is one word that I never see in any program, any lesson plans, or I should say very seldom see. I very seldom hear anybody even talk about this one word. And that one word is love.
Wow.
Where is the love in education? Where is the love? We've got to reach back. And you can't tell me it doesn't exist, because I know educators are not in education for the money. Far from it. They're in it because there's something in our hearts that keeps us moving. There's something that lives within us that make us continue to reach out and stretch out to try to help students to become better citizens, civically and other kind of way. But it makes my heart feel good just to see you two here. And that's what, that's live. You can't beat that. You can't beat that with a stick. So I just want to interject. And the other thing I want to say is NYSSBA sent out a book to all of the directors called Seats at the Table. Now, you need to get a hold of this book, and you need to read this book. I don't know if you can see it or not. Seats at the Table, what it's about school board members' perspectives on race and racism. And it's about school board members all across the country, Native American school board members, Mexican Americans, African Americans, Asian, Latinx, Latinos, all of us. And what amazed me, I read this book, I'm reading it for the second time. What amazed me about this book is that every story in this book I can relate to. I could have written this book. And I think everyone who put excerpts in this book, all the stories are the same. All of our stories are the same when it comes down to racism. And so we really need to take a look at that. I honestly feel in my heart that this is a time of change, and we must come together and we must grab a hold of this time now. This is our time. It's our time to make a difference in education. And we can do that if we come together, if we cooperate, if we realize that it's about all of us.
Wow. Darcy, can I jump in right there?
Yeah, go right ahead,
that's
Deborah.
amazing. When you talk about the passion and the love, I've been a superintendent since 2008. And yes, I started when I was the youngest in the world at 15. And so, at that time, this is Deborah's story, that it was about the performance goal orientation, and that you always had to know and you had to be right. But through the years, I've learned it's not about the performance goal orientation. It's about the learning goal orientation, in that if you don't know, it's okay not to know, but it's not okay not to know and not to learn, and not to learn from each other. Now, in the role of the superintendent, we have to be the connectors. We have to be the conductors. We have to be the one to cause the change. And I believe my takeaway from this whole COVID scenario is the fact that we must work together and Sylvester and love each other. Enough of dismantling and sabotage in any way. Now is the time to resurrect, reset, move forward, and let's get our babies educated. But the only way to educate our young people is to educate the adults, and to bring the adults together to have an equitable mindset. An equitable mindset to believe that children dressed up like me have the capacity to grow and develop and to have a quality future. Amen.
And you know,
Amen. Amen.
I'm gonna again want to coin your equitable mindset statement there. I'm gonna coin that.
You may.
So, I mean, honestly, so two of you have really, you know, sort of encapsulated a couple of things that I think I can reiterate just a little bit, because I think it's important that you know, Sylvester has talked about the passion of educators, which is so true. It's been completely evident, if not more so than during the pandemic. And as well, on the other side of that is the board members who have been there with great passion just as much. And so I just want to say, Mark and I, we talk to boards. Of course, we do 100 or more retreats a year. So we're talking very intimately with boards of education all the time. And by and large, the number one reason why they run for the Board of Education is to serve kids. So we've got passion on both sides of the aisle here, and there's no reason why we should not be taking up this call to action for this equitable mindset that we need to try to cultivate. And nothing better, Sylvester, than a book discussion with your Board of Education. You could use Seats at the Table, great book, or pick another one on the topic. But I have seen many, many boards of education take up a book discussion as one of their efforts for their own professional development. And it is a great and wonderful tool, because what we are talking about is really building our self-awareness, creating a common language, taking a look around us, being very mindful, and really beginning to identify what's important to us as a community of students, teachers, and the larger community, for what's best for kids and how we educate them, not only for right now, but for their future. And so I love the suggestions, book discussion group. Make sure we are working towards that equitable mindset for all our board members around the table. And you know, it trickles down when we start to have the conversation at the board table and with the superintendent. It creates a certain synergy that's been proven already in the research that helps then create the action items that follow it all the way on through the entire educational system. So let's get started on that conversation. And Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you for our next question, if we can do that.
Sure, thank you. So we've already seen now the research demonstrates that a more diverse teaching and administrative staff benefits our students. And we understand that the board has an important role in this initiative. But there's a very important question that remains, and it's a question we hear a lot from districts. How do we do this work? Having the desire to diversify is not enough if you don't know where to start. And let's face it, there are far fewer diverse candidates, especially in our more rural parts of the state. Dr. Wortham, I'll ask you, how do we secure a more diverse workforce in our schools?
Wow. Well, Mark, the old saying, it takes an entire village to educate a child. It takes an entire village to secure a more diverse workforce. We know that the practices described in the research, they're associated with successfully attracting and hiring and retaining all teachers. And I think we've discussed that throughout our time together today. But there are certain phases of the hiring process, such as recruiting, selecting and hiring, and onboarding and retaining staff members. And that's the question. So you must conduct feasibility studies. And I think in my experience as a superintendent, I believe in doing audits in every area. So when it's data driven and it's your outreach is targeted, it's because you've conducted these feasibility studies and you know you can project your workforce in the coming years or in the coming years so that you can advertise early and hire early. Right now, I have several interim positions because we were out of season for hiring. And you know, candidates normally don't want to leave a district or location in the middle of the year or some time that's would leave another district in a lurch. So conducting these data-driven feasibility studies so that you know how many teachers you need on board. And then when you look at that complement, what do we look like? What do we sound like? How many languages are we embracing? So we want to do that study and we want to extend our outreach beyond individual networks. I rely very heavily on my networks. I rely on Rotary. I rely on my sorority, which just happens to be the same sorority as Kamala Harris. What can I say? And so I rely heavily on publishing vacancy notices early and hiring early so that people can plan and prepare, and involving teachers into this hiring process. We rely heavily on HR, and that's great because HR absolutely has a role, but then there are multiple measures that we can also include. Lorna even referenced how they alter the questions or really review the questions that are asked. What about having opportunities for teachers to come and do demonstration lessons, if you will? So you have to have multiple measures. And then what about networking the unlikely subjects? You know, going to talking to people in the district. I know someone who. The other day, one of the board members came in and just said, look at this resume. Think about this. Not only that, people make recommendations. And I absolutely love that. So we want to forecast the positions that we will need. And we want to make sure that we network with other institutions such as the colleges and universities. We want to have an outreach with our HBCUs, our historically Black colleges and universities. And then we have to do a home check. Is our environment welcoming? Does our hiring practice, does our perception precede the invitation to come on board? Do we have mentoring in place? Have we institutionalized? People will perform on the level in which they are recruited. And when that happens, when you recruit people on a higher level and you're showing them, your website is definitely speaks to the successes in the district and all of the love, Sylvester, that takes place, all of the incremental celebrations, etc. And so we want to make sure that our culture, the way we do business, is the one that speaks volumes of welcoming and how we treat people before they ever apply. And it is that building that systemic stamina, if you will, that really invites people before the invitation is ever extended. And that's what we are working on right here at home, right here in Roosevelt, that cultural change, making sure, because when that culture is in place and is positive, then both recruitment, teaching, and learning will all work in concert together.
Thank you, Deborah. And Dr. Lewis, you had mentioned several things earlier that I think Deborah was alluding to, and I'm wondering if you can speak to those again and further the points that you were trying to make earlier, because so many of those strategies are important for our board members to know and understand as they're trying to support the superintendent with the efforts that might be a little unusual, historically, but are really important now as we're trying to build diversity in the workforce.
Yeah, I think Deborah hit on several of them, but I'll reiterate. I think everybody knows me as a data person, so I generally bring to any conversation a reality on the data. There are 732 superintendents in New York State, and yet we have 44 superintendents of color, and that's Black, Latinx. So the reality is that we have a dire need for boards of education to begin to believe that the head of the helm, the person in charge of the ship, can be a person of color, even though you're looking at your ship. So that's the first thing. Boards of education need to believe and understand they have that ceiling for people of color. So that's the first thing I would say, that boards of education need to understand that there are plenty of candidates out there who can be at the helm, and that when they come to your districts, they need to have more than one contract. Because what's happening, I will call it as I see it, many of my colleagues of color are coming to districts and they get one contract and they're out. And then once they're out, they can't get another district. So the other thing I would say to the boards is be open to receiving a candidate who may not have had their contract extended in another district, because boards change and they are still good people. And I can think of many people out there who are looking for jobs right now who are of color, because their boards changed and they are no longer superintendents. So that's one level, is that you have to understand not only will you need teachers of color, but you also need superintendents to be given a chance. There are many ways that you can build your diverse workforce, and let's start from the ground. The ground is there are districts that are growing their own from their teaching, from their students. I can think of, I have a position with the state, so I know a lot of what's happening in all the districts. I want to shout out the Baldwin School District, because they just got the Superintendent of the Year, Shari Cami. And one of the reasons I would say is that the dynamic program that the board supports in that district. And let me say that they have a cadre of students that are working with a university who are going to become teachers. So you can partner with a university to grow teachers from in your high school. So you can have an academy, as they do, to build an academy so that they student teach, they start doing things from the 9th grade on, and then they partner with a university, and that university then admits them. So just as you do in any profession, it's a recruitment. So that's one. The other thing you could do to build that diverse first, there are people in the industry. We can't get math teachers, we can't get chemistry teachers, we can't get science teachers, but there are people who we could convince, who are chemists and mathematicians, who we could convince to become teachers. So there are parents in our midst, and they can seek waivers with the State Department to be able and to work with the university to get them the necessary training and support to bring them in to our schools. So that's another thing. Dr. Werther mentioned HBCUs, fraternities, sororities, and lots of local, there's LILTA, there's and the NAACP, the National Coalition of Black Educators. There are lots of ALAS, which is another one for the Latinx organizations. So they're organizations that you need to reach out to because they're people who are available. Next, I want to say, who is interviewing your candidates? Who is looking at that resume? So you need to have some training on how to look at resumes to see if you can identify some signals for people of color. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Connie Evelyn in Valley Stream 13, who changed her interview strategies, and we all are now copying it to Flipgrids. So people, you know, that little 15-minute interview that we do to kind of get to know people. In the old days, they'd have to leave their jobs and come for 15 minutes to your district. Now with COVID, and she did this before COVID, if you send your video in, answering the same questions, so that standardizes the questions. So that, you know, with an equity lens included, if you standardize the questions on your Flipgrid, so the candidates in their application, they do the Flipgrid. What that does is you have standard set of questions that people will use, and you also see physically whether you have minority candidates. So that is accompanying your resume. You also have to do a Flipgrid. So that's a great way to identify people to get into your diversity pool. Also, does your website reflect diversity? If your website isn't welcoming people, if they don't see anybody like you, why would they want to come there? So you have to look at that, and you need to collect the data. Remember, I said I'm a data person. You need to collect the data. How many candidates applied? How many candidates of color were interviewed? How many candidates of color made it to the final round? That is really, really important. If your pipeline is too narrow to begin, you're not going to get through to your whether it's the superintendent or administrators or teachers of color. Grow your pipeline. Make sure that your community is ready to receive candidates of color. So that means you've got to do some hard work. You've got to do that hard work to make sure that your community is receiving of candidates of color. It's okay. You know, I was a physics teacher. A Black woman. I was a physics teacher, and a very good one at that. And, you know, I never had to convince any community, you know, I mean, that was a very, very unique position. So you need to convince people that it's okay. You know, that person of color really does know what they're doing. And so that's diversity work that needs to be done in your belief statements, not just a statement, but professional development for your community as well as your teachers. That is, you must include that in your desire to build that workforce. So it's from the ground up, which is what I loved about Russia Henrietta. They're doing it from the ground up. And so many other people. I give a shout out to Phyllis Harrington in Oceanside. They're doing equity work, really deep equity work. So I see all of these efforts that are just growing, and I'm so happy that superintendents are joining that effort. School boards are joining that effort. We need to expand to have that welcoming and affirming environment so people don't just come into your community for one term. And the other thing I just remembered is your reputation is out there. Dr. Wortham spoke about that. If teachers come and never get tenure, people find out. You know, so you check the box by having a diverse candidate, but that diverse candidate never makes it to tenure. It's important when you celebrate your tenure, you know, you have that tenure celebration at the end of the year. People are going to look to see if you have a diverse workforce before they even apply. So those are all things that I would say. More to come when you see Deborah and I in the fall.
One thing that I can add value to, one more outreach, and that is we embrace Teach for America, alternative strategies for certification. And I studied one district, and specifically one school. And this elementary school was the lowest performing elementary school, not only in that district, but in the entire state. And out of, I would say, I believe it is 55 teachers, 40 of those teachers were Teach for America. And at the end of that year, then that school received an award for America's Best Elementary School for significant improvement. And I firmly believe that the groundswell, the piece that unified them, it wasn't the differences in how they came to the table, but once they arrived, the mission statement, the vision statement is the piece that united everyone. Darcy, you talked about the synergy and united everyone and compelled them all to move forward. Where was this school? It was in the heart of Martin Luther King Boulevard. In the heart of Martin Luther King Boulevard. Don't tell me it's not possible, because it is possible. You bring them from the north, south, east, and west. My board talks about tone at the top. Exactly. Tone at the top. You set that tone, you compel the superintendent to move forward. That connects with the cabinet, that connects with the teachers. And oh my goodness, significant improvement. One year.
Yeah, actually, I'm sure Sylvester would agree. I saw him shaking his head there a minute ago, the tone at the top. And so I'm kind of curious, Sylvester, what are the questions that board members need to be asking to their superintendents about this issue of recruiting, hiring, making sure that they stay, trying to make, would you have any suggestions for your fellow board members about, what's the type of questions you want to make sure you're asking so that this level of recruitment and retention and welcoming is happening at the school district for the hiring of teachers or other professionals?
Well, the key word, Darcy, key word that you just said there, I believe, is welcoming. And I believe Dr. Lewis and Dr. Wortham both said it also. We have to open our arms to this, and we have to realize, I think oftentimes, what will it take for us to finally get there, to finally have a diverse workforce? And I think about the President Kennedy, when he was thinking about us taking a trip to the moon, and he asked a scientist, what will it take for us to reach the moon? And the scientist said 5 words: the will to do it. And I think that's where we're at. And that's why I talk about love and passion and wearing our passion on our sleeve, because it takes the will. If we can just come together and realize that if we have a diverse workforce, it's going to help solve a multitude of problems that we're dealing with every day that we wouldn't have to deal with if we could just get that across. And I just think that this time that we're going through right now is a huge opportunity for us to right years and years and years of wrong that can take us all, take our districts, take our community, take our country forward. And it's up to us as educators, I believe, to make it happen. Our kids are counting on us. They're counting on us. I mean, this past year has been devastating for our kids. But one thing that I've learned about kids, and I spend a lot of time in talking with students and listening to students to find out where their head is and where their heart is. And one of the things I've learned about students is they bounce back quickly if they're given direction. They bounce back quickly. And like I said before, if we can just let our students know how valuable they are, and the fact that there truly is greatness in them. And I believe it's our challenge as educators to not only help students realize that there's greatness in them, but then for us to go to work, to set the policies, to set up those things to help them develop that greatness. It's about them recognizing their greatness, and it's about us helping them to develop it. Go to work.
Absolutely. And Mark, I don't know if you wanted to add anything further. I mean, you know, I think if you could speak to, again, the outline on this question that you developed, I think it's a great summary to this conversation.
Well, most of what I would add would just be a reiteration, but if we're looking to find the candidates, partner with your local colleges and universities, develop relationships with the historically Black colleges and universities, reach out to the various sororities and fraternities that exist out there. Make connections with people in your community, with your staff, and use them as recruiters to bring people into the district and learn more about what's happening in the district and the initiatives that you've got in your districts, and then allow them to go out into their own communities to recruit for you. And take advantage of homegrown educator programs at the state level, and try and look into developing some of your own. There are some school districts that you know, right now are looking at using their own students and incentivizing them if they go into the teaching profession to come back and teach in their home district. As we're
Which is
thinking,
what you did, right?
yes, that is what I did. I went back and taught in my home district. That's correct. When we're looking to recruit, use data to inform your hiring practices. Make sure that the board is aware of the hiring process that exists in the district. Make sure they're highlighting trends and being able to predict the future needs of the district so they can prepare for those needs. Make sure we've developed a welcome and accepting culture in the district. Ensure that, you know, if our goal is to diversify the workforce and bring new people into our district, that the culture is welcoming and accepting to them, that this is a place where they're going to feel comfortable. This is a place where they're going to want to stay long term. Engage in early outreach. In soon as you identify a need in the district, outreach to those sources to find those candidates. And of course, as I said before, listen and be honest. If a new teacher is coming to your district and he or she represents the first diverse teacher coming into the district, be honest with them. Share with them the steps that you're taking to make their transition into the district as comfortable as possible. The steps that you're taking with the rest of the staff through professional development, steps that you're taking with your students through learning opportunities in this DEI framework. And then once we've hired them, provide support, provide recognition, show them that you are aware of the work that they're doing, that you care about the work that they're doing, and continue to challenge them. Provide professional development opportunities that are not only geared toward race, but toward being a better teacher and toward growing as a professional. One of the things that Dr. Lewis spoke of, and I'll go back to a conversation I had with Dr. Rodman King from SUNY Oswego when we were preparing for this webinar, and as he said that having the desire to bring someone into your school district is not enough. The community has to support this initiative, because if the school district is welcoming and the staff and the students and the administrators are welcoming, that's fantastic. But remember, these new candidates have to live in your community. And so if the community is not supporting this initiative, then you're going to have candidates that are either going to be turned off or that choose to go somewhere else. So engage with your community leaders through your city hall and through your Rotaries and your churches and all of the different stakeholders that exist in a city or in a community to ensure that we're not only making the school environment comfortable, but we're making the entire living environment comfortable for these candidates.
Yeah, Mark, I might add that I know of some rural districts where they're housing is a part of the recruitment. And so that's really showing that they're committed to that, because you're asking a candidate to come up to your area, and if there's no reasonable housing, then you might want to put that as part of your recruitment investment, so that you have a housing. And the other thing is that there's a reason that Noah took animals into the ark 2 by 2. It's not really a good idea to get one candidate. It always is try to get 2, so that somebody has a partner, a heart partner, so if you can, rather than just be the single person out there, although if you have, it's at least you're starting somewhere. But it just is to say that you have someone else who's coming in, because people do bond with their, their cohort. And so that is good. And then the third thing I would say is look at your salaries. If your salaries are not competitive, you're not going to keep your candidate. So a lot of times, there are districts that hire great teachers, invest the professional development dollars in them, and their salaries are so low that they're ripe for the picking for other districts. So that's board work that has to be done. Look at your salaries, look at housing, all of that. It's an investment. It's an investment if you really do mean to be inclusive and to expand diversity.
Right.
That's a great point, Dr. Lewis. And talk about investment. I just want to make a note here of what investment is happening at the state education department level. I want to point out that the New York State Education Department and the Board of Regents have been also actively engaged in activities to help diversify the workforce, in particular around really getting folks into the pipeline, right? Because we need more folks in the pipeline. And so they're funding 3 programs to help build a pipeline for new teacher candidates. One of them is called the Teacher Opportunity Corps 2. It's part of the My Brother's Keeper initiative. They seek to help increase participation rate of historically underrepresented and economically disadvantaged individuals to get them into the teaching career. So there's some funding that's going on there. Encourage your young folks if they're interested in teaching. There's a couple of teacher diversity pipeline pilots that are going on right now where they're funding teacher aides and teacher assistants to try to help develop them to see if they can support a pathway for them to become certified teachers. And often we're finding a more diverse population of folks in the teacher aide or teacher assistant positions in our district. So maybe there's an opportunity there to take advantage of and to assist those folks. And then there's the Teachers of Tomorrow, and that's to help, districts aid in recruiting and retaining teachers and high-need schools and districts, and help to earmark some money for tuition reimbursement and some of the home, grow your own at home, where we're helping to encourage students to go into the teaching profession. So all of these things are being undertaken now so that we can help build that teacher pipeline for the future. So all of these efforts all work towards helping create diversity among our education personnel. But also I want to just point out that we need to make the same efforts to help diversify our boards of education as well. That has to be a sincere effort for all of us who are on the board to, consider who else is out there that maybe you can encourage to consider running for the board, that might be a person of color or has the awareness to build diversity on our boards. We also know the NYSSBA Commission on Diversity and Inclusivity is also working very hard to review the research and provide promising strategies to support diversity. A couple of our folks here at NYSSBA have a seat at the table with the NYSSBA Commission, and we're working together to partner on that. And we also know our teachers union, NYSED, is also out there with their Take a Look at Teaching initiative to also support diversity. So we've got a lot of boots on the ground. I do think that we are making headway. We are seeing change happen, but we need to continue to maintain the efforts because a lot of the work is just beginning. So I want to take a moment here just to recognize our time. I know we're getting very close to the end of our time together. I want to ask our guests if you have any final comments you'd like to make as we conclude our discussion.
I will say, in the words of Vice President Kamala Harris, first of all, she said, "I'm still speaking," and we have to have voice. We must have voice, and we must cultivate voice of our students. We must, and we have to cultivate voice of our staff. We've heard the word listen. And she also said, "I may be the first, but I won't be the last." And so now that we're all wearing Chuck Taylor tennis and pearls, we have to continue to allow our young people, allow our teachers to know that you too. I saw someone had a quote, "If you can't get a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." For whatever reason, that seat, I invite our high school students to come into my conference room so that they can sit in the pleather chairs. You know, they can see what it feels like actually sitting in that boardroom. And this is the kind of culture and environment that our boards cultivate and our superintendents implement. It is, we have to embrace, this is Deborah's own thought coming from George Floyd and the whole crisis that took place, in that move your knee. We have to be knee movers. We have to move our knee, move the obstacles that we put in place to keep people from growing and developing others. The philosophy of efficacy speaks to rallying, moving those targets so that we can breathe, grow, and develop. And never again, when you walk into a room, should you hear the whispers, "She's Black. She's a she."
Thank you, Deborah. Dr. Lewis, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with today?
So you have me following a preacher. There, Dr. Wortham. The latest version of our school administrator, which is the magazine that's put out by AASA, is a wonderful, it focused on racial equity. And one of my great heroine, Sharon Contreras, who was in Syracuse as a superintendent, is now the superintendent in Guilford, has a wonderful piece about being equity warriors. And I like that term a lot. In fact, I tweeted her out and I contacted her about that term. I think that all educators in New York need to become equity warriors. We need to see ourselves as breaking barriers down, opening up opportunities, modeling the kinds of opportunities that we want our children to be. We have the responsibility to create a very different world, a world where January 6th doesn't happen again, a world where George Floyd doesn't happen again, a world where our children see themselves as having possibilities. And until they see models in front of them where they can actually say, you know, I can be a superintendent, I could be a doctor, I can be a lawyer. I don't have to I don't have to stay in the circumstances that I see around in my family. They have to have hope. They have to have aspirations. And the only way to do that is to have role models. So let's be equity warriors. Let's move in that battle for opportunities for our children.
Thank you, Lorna. And Sylvester, I'll let you have the last word here. What would you say? Any final words?
Well, now you got me following two great women. Now, what am I supposed to do? But what I will share with you, what I would like to share with all of you, and all of the people who are listening. I'd like to share the words to my latest video. It's called My America Too, and it goes like this. We don't live in this world alone. One race can no longer sit on the throne. One ideology can't control the masses. All citizens' voices give society its passes. Those of you who are haters of others because they're different than you should know when you shine your light on citizens, America shines her light on you. This is my America. This is my America. This is my America too. So let's put down our devices and look our neighbors in the eye. God put us all here together, and that's the reason why those of you who have a lot sitting high on a ridge must now just help us build this bridge. We're building a bridge across this land, one of hope and working together. The situation's calling for a brand new plan. Time we all come together. America, show the world that freedom has no color and equality has no race. Time we all start working together to make America a better place. So let's share the love like never before. Let our guard down and opening our door. Have a conversation and listen to what's said. Let it into our heart. It may change what's in our head. If we can't preach like Peter and we can't pray like Paul, just tell the love of Jesus Christ and how he died to save us all. This is my America. This is my America. This is my America too. So that's just a few words from it. But it goes on to say that Black and brown brothers and sisters, it's time to stand up and let your voices be heard. Start voting in record numbers and let America experience the power of your words. Start getting involved and living Brother Martin's dream. Help rebuild America to bring back the spirit of a team. This is my America. This is my America too. We've got to set the record straight. America won't exist with all this hate. I'm talking about Republicans and Democrats. We are all citizens, and that's a fact. And there is no turning back. This is my America. This is my America too.
Thank you, Sylvester. Yeah, I agree. You know, our America has to really be one that respects and honors diversity, and so well put. I really appreciate your words. As we are bringing this to a close and concluding this particular webinar series on diversity, equity, and inclusivity, I will leave our members and our viewers out there with some final thoughts. As you've heard many good things here already this afternoon, meeting the needs of all students means school boards must actively work within their governance capacities at the board table to identify and eliminate barriers and obstacles that do negatively impact their students. I mean, we've seen this. Mark and I invite you to give us a call if you're interested in beginning this conversation at the table, no matter where you are beginning the conversation. We would like here at NYSSBA would like to support you in having that conversation and or finding the resources to help you have that conversation. As we close the series here, NYSSBA would like to thank all of our attendees for their attention and participation, our guests on the call who have made these webinars so informative and insightful, our sponsor, Utica National Insurance Group. And while some of our districts are well on their way to fulfilling the promise of equity in their schools, others are just beginning. So wherever you are in your work, we applaud your efforts and are committed to supporting you throughout your journey. I thank you all for what you do in serving our children in New York, and I wish you all well. Thank you to my panelists for bringing your great wisdom and your wonderful words to this conversation. I wish you all well and be safe out there, and good luck in all your endeavors. Thank you, everyone, for being part of our webinar today.
Thank you for watching this program produced by the New York State School Boards Association.